Welcome to I Hate It Here, the podcast for HR and people professionals, making the hardest job in the world just a little bit easier. I'm Hiba Youssef.
For you to ultimately understand somebody's point of view or lived experience, it was really just intentionally important for you to do your own research. We can't spoon feed you, all of the education. I think it shows a level of intentionality of caring about diversity, inclusion, and equity, and not, being performative about it.
Leave management doesn't have to be painful, impersonal, or keep you buried under a mountain of spreadsheets. Tilt turns life's biggest moments into opportunities for care and connection instead of a paperwork nightmare. And on September 17th, they're making a game-changing announcement that will transform leave of absences from an administrative afterthought into a cultural cornerstone. Welcome back to your favorite HR person's favorite podcast. I'm Hiba, your host and chaos queen of the hour. Eventually, I will land on the best way to introduce every podcast episode. And if one of these just lands with you, please reach out to me and tell me, because I will make it my official intro. This season, as you've heard, we've stripped all the sugarcoating off of workplace realities. And today's hard truth is no different, that being the only isn't just lonely, it's labor. Emotional labor. Women of color and other represented groups in leadership, in teams, in boardrooms are often carrying the extra weight of representation, education, and resilience in spaces that weren't really designed with them in mind. And this isn't just theory we're talking about, it's lived experience. And it's about naming what so many people have had to silently endure. And joining me today is Amina Gass. Amina is a passionate people leader with over a decade of experience building workplaces where individuals and organizations thrive. Known for being strategic, empathetic, and solutions-oriented, she scaled HR operations, led global transformations, and spearheaded programs that drive both business impact and employee experience. Her expertise spans total reward strategy, compensation, benefits, equity, HR systems operations, workforce planning, you name it. And throughout her career, she's navigated complex challenges with transparency and integrity, from global compliance to workforce reductions, while championing cultures of inclusion and growth. And Amina firmly believes HR is a catalyst for innovation and is committed to pushing the boundaries of what people operations can achieve. Amina, welcome to the party. Welcome to the pod.
Thank you so much, Hiba. Really appreciate it. I'm so happy to be here.
I'm so excited. We batted around a few ideas and we landed on this one about really talking about what the only feels like. But before we get there, I've been asking everyone this season, even though it's the whole theme, what is one hard truth about work that you want to share with the audience today?
So what's one hard truth is the emotional labor of being the only is what we're going to dive into. Essentially, being responsible for essentially the representation of a full ethnicity, and oftentimes, being, taken on the emotional burden and labor of being the only person. So this can manifest its ways in a couple of ways, but majority of being particularly Black women, it highlights educating colleagues about issues with race, code switching, managing emotional state, constant comforting of others, and ultimately by being the only and having the unspoken burdens of emotional labor can cause consequences of burnout, both on the physical, mental, and health side.
Yeah, we're going to get into all that in today's episode. I love that you wanted to make this the topic of conversation today. It's not a topic that is foreign to me. My sister is an engineer, and she's my older sister. And I don't really tend to talk about my family much on this podcast, but I will today because there's a very relevant situation here. She's an engineer, and she used to tell me stories about how she was always the only person in the room, either the only woman or she wears a headscarf. So she was very much would stand out as the only the only Muslim woman in a room. So she always felt like she stood out, and she talks quite a bit about what it is like to be that only, and what it felt like for her, especially in a heavily male dominated area and space of engineering. I think that's very different now. We've seen a massive push in the last 20 plus years to get more women in STEM fields, but early in her career, she was the only in so many rooms. And I think it really genuinely impacted how she was able to show up. And not just that, like the work she continues to do today to like build more spaces for people. And I think like when you brought up this topic, I was like, God, I hope I don't get emotional during this episode. I get emotional during a lot of episodes. Like people be listening to me and nobody be crying every episode. But it's a topic that I watched my sister struggle with, only then to enter the workforce and also feel pretty alienated, either as the only brown woman or the only woman on a leadership team, or just like all those instances where you're just like, I can't, being the only is already like so lonely, but then to have to like speak for an entire gender or an entire race, you're like, why did I get this honor? So we're going to dig into that today. Like, tell me a little bit about like when we brought up this topic, like what does being the only what could it actually feel like day to day?
So for me, day to day, it could consist of a couple of ways. And so, I mean, obviously we work in tech and predominantly people of color statistically are the lowest, right? And so oftentimes, operating in white majority, environments being the only kind of setting up the catalyst of diversity. So it honestly shows up in a couple of different ways. I think there is a expectation to be the voice of that specific race group, or in general diversity and inclusion efforts. An example of that would be like during Black Lives Matter moment, which is a human rights issues. I think it's important to understand what's happening in the broader world, because at the end of the day, like it impacts people, and having a pulse on what's happening, not quote unquote politically, but like in human rights issues is really important, how people show up. And so it's important for us as leaders and people who care about, people in general, to be able to have that point of view, to be educated on what's happening and speak on things that need to happen for the org. And so I think it's hard when you're the first only person to be that voice of diversity, to when you're also being impacted. There's so much happening, right? There's so much like emotions and feelings, and you have to be like strong. And also just like HR in itself, there's kind of like, it's a shield you have to kind of put on, a protective face, to be able to be cool, calm, and collected when like conflicts arise, or situations arise. It's a part of the nature. And so I think during that month, or during that season, I would say obviously DEI was top of mind for a lot of tech companies, which was really exciting. And it was unfortunate that a human life had to unfortunately died for that to happen. But at the end of the day, my leadership was like, I was tasked with like communicating that org, right? And so I'm
While
already,
you're navigating your own feelings.
exactly. And it's not, because when you think of diversity and inclusion, it's like, it's a science, right? It's like a practice. I think people have, expectations of what it means. And if you don't know what everything you need to know, then it's like, you're afraid of the perception of how you'll be viewed. Right. But I think, like I said, it's important for us to understand, like from an emotional burden perspective, if their impacted group is being, talked about or having things in the news, it's important for the leadership to step in and recognize that. Does it make sense for me to task this on somebody else that could add to the emotional burden of processing all of the things that are going on?
Yeah. I always feel like when it comes to those issues, it's almost like my identity has to take a backseat. It's like I don't get to, in those moments, process the same things maybe my community is going through, and instead I have to think about how's everybody else processing in this. And I think it's such a common analogy in HR, where we are always putting everyone else first, but then we forget that we are also employees who are experiencing everything. Now layer on the complicated aspect of being from like an underrepresented group, or being an only, where you're watching potentially atrocities happen against your community, and you're left wondering like, wait a minute, like my feelings are also now wrapped up in this. How do I navigate all of that?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think for me, like my personal values is justice. So I think it's important to say something. And so rather, even though I was tasked, I think it's a level of awareness to be able to understand the plight of some of the burdens that happen to, people of color when they're tasked to be the voice of all of the things related to DEI.
Yeah, we've touched a little bit on like the emotional labor piece of it. Like, how do you think it does show up differently, maybe for women of color compared to their peers? Like, we both identify as women of color, so I feel like that's why I'm asking this question. I'm not asking you to speak for an entire group of people, but I think when we really started talking about this conversation, it's very near and dear to both of us. And so, how does that emotional labor maybe sometimes show up differently?
Yeah, absolutely. I think like we have to also just like take into consideration like historical like biases, and like we're in a country that is historically systemically like racist, right? And
Yes.
so biases exist, and so we racial biases, all different types of biases impact marginalized communities at a different rate compared to non-marginalized communities, right? And so the way that I would say that there is differences is that there is just more um, opportunities for advancement, allyship, mentorship, right? When I, as a person of color, I feel like there is this need to be perfect, right? To be a machine because I am the first. So unintentionally, I'm also kind of like representing, a group of, people as well. And so it's important for us that we have to like work twice as hard. Like we are out trying to outperform, outshine, trying to be driven at all costs without having the right support mechanisms in place to create a leveling playing field um, compared to our counterparts. I think it's a job sometimes like it doesn't set you up for success, right? And so you have to based off of my personal experiences what looked like I have to kind of find allyship, I have to communicate, I have to self-advocate, I have to be able to like influence, because at the end of the day like you have to challenge some of these unconscious bias, like whether you want to or not. And I think like it's important for me to be super clear in communication, because sometimes we have to code switch. Like stereotypes exist, right? And so I'm constantly monitoring and filtering how I show up. And so I have to be mindful and cognizant of what it is I'm going to say, because I don't want it to be, construed to me being aggressive or angry or emotional. And there are, people of color and specifically women are labeled these terms, and it's ultimately not fair, because it really kind of pigeonholes folks into this category of emotion, and like decredits their ability to be on merit and achievement. And we hired you for being able to ask questions and being curious and helping us solve like challenging problems. I think being able to understand that diversity of thought leads companies to success, and the conditions that you create for somebody to feel safe enough to even voice their ideas, like I want to ponder that. Do companies actually think about that, right? And so it's like if your idea can ultimately generate the company to success, it's really important to create the conditions where people feel safe enough to be able to do so. And sometimes, again, it's about enabling people to kind of take you palpably, so that they don't prejudge you on unchecked biases, essentially.
Yeah, navigating that emotional labor day in and day out is exhausting to so many people. It's so hard to watch, like this challenge to like the desire to feel like perfect and great at everything you do. Like when you said that, I thought about that so often early in my career. I felt the need to like really prove myself to be a representation of like who I am. And I get messages from people quite regularly where they're like, I'm so happy to see like a brown woman in HR, like speaking out. And I'm like, there are a lot of us, there are a lot of Black women in HR speaking out, like, but I feel just like an overwhelming sense of responsibility that people even see that about me and like reach out and say that. And it like fills my heart with so much joy, but then also makes me take this even more seriously, because I want to be like that good representation. And that does really add up to like a lot of emotional labor. It's like, I've heard horror stories from friends that are like, yeah, we had one person in leadership who was a person of color and like it didn't work out. So they never hired another one again.
It's reality. And ultimately, that's also another reason why you have to like be twice as good or achieve perfect, which honestly, we're human beings. Like nobody is perfect. I had earlier in my career, I had a manager who said that she wanted to be like a machine, right? And so like when you're saying things like you can't make mistakes, and there's also all of these other convoluted like factors that impact like your level of awareness or advancement or having a seat at the table. It's like you just have to understand that code switching and being able to be palatable so that people don't judge you off of that is like really, really important. And so yeah,
we got to talk about, yeah, I mean, we're facing so much, like when you are the only in a room, it is really tough. And if you're listening to this and you are the only in any sort of regard at your company, on your team, in your environment, know you're like not alone. There's like, I've experienced it. Amina's experienced it. There's a lot of people out there who are the first of a certain type of person to be at their organization, and it is incredibly lonely. And I think the other piece of it is like, okay, having your lived experience is one thing. Now let's like talk about like microaggressions, because those are part of a lot of our lived experiences. I could tell you a few microaggressions I've experienced, but how do microaggressions like actually compound this experience of like the loneliness of being the only over time?
Yeah, absolutely. I just wanted to also just add to that other point. It's okay to make mistakes.
Yeah.
Making mistakes enables you to grow. Don't chase perfection, chase progress. And I think, it's important for you to understand that learning comes from being uncomfortable and making those mistakes. So don't give yourself grace. I wish I would have told Amina that when I was younger.
Same. I was like running myself ragged so early in my career, chasing like this elusive protection, like elusive perfection. And it like really took me realizing that like I might never be perfect in anyone's eyes. What matters is like that I wake up and I still get to live my values every day. And that's more important to me than this idea of being perfect. I don't want to be perfect. There's no point. Who am I trying to please?
Agreed. So the second question that you were asked is how do microaggressions compound over time? So I think microaggressions it ultimately just leads to a phenomenon of mental exhaustion. So the one thing that I could say that it signals leads to burnout, health issues, and isolation. And we're also in a field where I think you taking care of the most important asset in any organization, it's people, which is huge. Oftentimes, like there is no support for HR, right? And that's why I love, the community safe space, HIPAA, that you created. It's because it allows us to not feel like we're isolated. We need environments and moments of belonging too. And so it's a hard job, but it's meaningful because and I take this very seriously, have the responsibility to advocate and move people forward, right? And when you move people forward in a positive way, it'll yield success, in my opinion. But the negative consequences of unchecked microaggressions, and as it like builds up, it's like definitely burnout. And so some common examples of microaggression, which is I think is really important to add, is like tone policing, labeling people aggressive, having assertive reactions met with disdains for requests that are sometimes deemed as overly bold. And so I think, for me, communication is like one of my personal values. And, as a first generation immigrant, English isn't my first language. So I think a lot of conflict arises from like lack of communication. And so I'm very intentional about how I communicate because I never want to be misunderstood. I think it centers back to like me wanting to feel seen, heard, and just understood, right? Because at the core of it is we just want to be understood, right? And so I think it's important to, I think having elements where microaggressions will happen, where it's like, for example, I was in a meeting in one of my previous orgs, and sometimes just me asking questions was like, because to me, I ask questions. It's like curiosity. Context is kind of my strength, and so for me to understand, I have to like ask questions, right? And so sometimes asking questions, even though you're trying to be helpful or to seek to understand, will be met with like defensiveness, right? And so it's like what, whoa, what's going on here? It's like you have to then, I think it's also important to like build relationships, but it's would it be different if Billy asked the same question, or is it a problem that Amina asked it, right? And so
I mean, Amina, early in my career, I got feedback all the time that I was like too aggressive, too opinionated. I asked too many questions. And I was like, I'm trying to understand the problems we're trying to solve. That is why I'm asking questions. And I wasn't barreling in there being like, tell me about this thing. I'd be like, can you help me understand? Like, why are we doing it this way? It is so interesting to think about, like, if I was a Billy, would that question have been received differently?
absolutely. I constantly have to like find myself. I think that's why like connecting on a human to human level is like really important. And I think just being vulnerable enables people to understand where you're coming from. I think when you kind of set the agenda where we're on the same team, my goal is to help you win. Like your success is my success, and together we can move things forward. And so it's all about having to understand those subtle micro, aggressions that happen, and playing and acting. I think integrity and just being myself, but just channeling like integrity and kindness, and like just reframing the fact that like we're on the same team. So there's no, I'm not the enemy. You know what I mean? And so,
Yeah. Sorry. The interesting thing I was just thinking as you were talking is like some microaggressions are like super overt and others are super subtle. And like I feel like a lot clicked for me when I really started to like dig into the subtle microaggressions, because then I also became more mindful of my own behavior, right? I'm not going to say I've run free, clear, Scott in my life and maybe I haven't microaggressed someone. I might have. And like, but the goal is that I need to understand what subtle looks like, because not all of it is this like overt thing that everyone's talking about. Yeah. And I think like in a microaggression I experienced, which like really for me, I was like, whoa, I guess this does like, I mean, sometimes you think to yourself, like, they're so subtle for so long. You're like, I have never experienced a microaggression. Right. And now like looking back on the history of my career, I'm like, God, I was like being microaggressed all the time and I didn't realize, or I didn't have the tools to be like, hey, that's inappropriate. But I think the most overt thing to happen to me was I like worked at an org where my closest friend at the org was another brown woman. And I'm just going to paint a picture. She and I look very differently. We both have dark hair, but we have very different body shapes, like complete opposite of body shapes. Like, right? We also have two very different roles at the organization. Like she was on one side, I was on the complete opposite in HR. And I remember being at an event where all day at the event, I was the moderator because it was a company event where I was the HR facilitator of said event. And somebody came up to me afterwards and was like, hey, like so good to see you. I really like love the work you've been doing on this project. And I was like, that project, that's like not even my job. Like that's like, I was like, I'm sorry, do you think I'm this person? Like I didn't say it, but I was like, what? And they were like, yeah, that project, like, and they kept telling me about it. And I was like, oh, in the second it clicked for me, they thought I was my best friend. And like, okay, maybe if we were everywhere together 24/7, like I no, I'm not going to even make excuses. I was like, you got to be fucking kidding me. We don't even look anything alike. We have two completely different names. We happen to both be brown. And that is the only thing we have in common, like brown skin and brown hair. And at the time I like walked away from the conversation. I went and found her and I was like, uh, is that a microaggression? And my friend was like, sure was. That absolutely was. And I was like, I was so baffled in the conversation that I was like, I don't even know what's happened. Like I was confused. I had been on stage all day for like 8 hours presenting and I was like just exhausted. Like, the kind of exhaustion that like sits in your bones. So I was like, I don't even know what's happening here. And I didn't even know how to respond. And that was like probably one of the most overt type of microaggressions. I just like walked away from the conversation, honestly, because I was just like, I can't even correct this person. Also, like, what do I do? And like after that experience, feeling so just like out of it during it is like really when I was like, I need to make sure I understand like overt and subtle microaggressions so that I never do this to another person. Because what a way to alienate someone. What a way to make someone feel so not included, other than mistaking them for someone who happens to be from the same ethnicity as them and thinking they are the same person.
Absolutely. Or intentionally mispronouncing their name,
Even after several times you correcting them.
Absolutely. My biggest one that I actually like, it irks me so bad is, I think there are people who are very comfortable calling me girl. Like, hey girl, what's up girl? And it's like, why are you calling me girl? My name is not girl, And so I think it's like, it's very important for me, it's like, I don't want to be like referenced to or by my gender, And I think like sometimes like there's stereotypes where just a vernacular of, African American people, it's like, it's a very informal, right? And so it's like, we're in a professional environment, you calling me, hey girl, it's a pet peeve of mine. So I'm like, no, please don't call me that.
Like, it's also
Absolutely.
infantilizing. That's the right word, right? I always butcher that word. Yeah. Like, I'm not meant to feel like a child. Why would you? I worked with an executive once who would say, one time in a meeting, he said, like, just between us girls, like me and him. And I said, yeah, so we're not going to say that again. Like, I literally in the meeting, I was like, I have nothing to lose. We are exactly the same level. We are peers. I was like, we're just not going to say that again. And he's like, but isn't it like a funny colloquialism? And I was like, it is infantilizing for you to address me as a girl when I am a grown woman in the workplace, like trying to navigate all the things that I have to do with the set of authority that I'm given, when like yours is granted unchecked and I somehow have to earn my authority simply because of my gender. So like, we're not going to say that. And I was like really nice about it. I'm never like mean, because I'm like, okay, I'm going to, for lack of I hating this phrase, assume positive intent. I like to assume that people are just so unaware sometimes because of their lived experience, but they also have to do the work. Like, I should not be burdened with constantly explaining to you like why we shouldn't behave as such. But for the first pass, I will give everyone at least one pass. And if I see that they're like willing to learn and engage in a conversation, I'm down to continue it. But if you are a constant offender and you're expecting me to constantly be burdened with explaining to you why the things you're doing are harming people from certain groups, I'm just going to write you off in my book eventually. Let's be honest, is outsourced leave management just a fancy way of saying you've outsourced the humanity right out of it? Tilt is here to fix that. Their AI-powered platform handles all the admin tasks that eat into your time, like payroll updates, compliance tracking, status changes, so that you can actually focus on supporting your people through life's big, messy, and human moments. And on September 17th, they're dropping something that will turn leave from an afterthought into your secret weapon for culture and strategy. So mark your calendars, because Tilt is keeping HR trusted, strategic, and human first.
Absolutely. I think it's just like also just changing the paradigm. It's like, for you to ultimately understand somebody's point of view or lived experience, it's really just intentionally important for you to like do your own research. We can't spoon feed you, all of the education. I think it shows a level of intentionality of like, caring about diversity, inclusion, and equity, and not, being performative about it. And I think we've seen post, COVID and 2020, how the rollback on all these DEI initiatives are happening. And so I think there's like a stance. I'm like, no, I think to me, I believe in saying what you mean and meaning what you say. Your words should be backed up by your action. Your action is being modeled to the rest of the organization, and but that model means that it's learned behavior. So if we're saying that we care about something, we have to back it up with the how, And so I think not a lot of people give too much thought on the latter part, which ultimately I think is just an ability to not want to step in somebody else's shoes. It's uncomfy, It's like, if it's not your lived experience, why should I care? If your intention is to be a leader at an organization, and one of the motivations of employee is a sense of belonging, right? You have to be able to care and relate that care by speaking to that individual or employee, because again, it's going to, at the end of the day, the highest cost to any organization, it's people, right? And so when people I want to stay at an organization where they feel valued, heard, seen, and belong.
Yeah. It's so interesting because I just am so grateful I read a lot growing up, because I feel like I was privy to a lot of lived experiences simply by just being a curious reader. But I still think I have so much perspective to gain. And so when leaders are like, oh, I don't know what that's like, or when all those CEOs were doing calls from their mansions during COVID telling people to go back to the office, I'm like, are you kidding me right now? Are you actually kidding me? Just think about the fact, all you have to do is imagine the opposite of your experience. Imagine the opposite of it. And I just think then that gives you a tiny bit of perspective. And then you have to talk to others and care, because that's the hard part about being a leader. You're right. We want everyone to feel like they belong, and people don't feel like they belong when you're constantly not appreciative of the fact that they have a different lived experience than you. And every single person does. And it brings me to this really important topic of representation. Representation is so important. It is, being the only is so hard. I have been that role too many times. Too many times I'm like, it's me again, here I am. And I think thinking about representation, what are some myths around representation that you want to debunk, or that should be debunked?
Yeah, I think one is having one person of color equals representation.
Oh my God.
Yeah. True representation requires not just the presence but empowerment to speak up and influence decisions. And so it's not having a seat filled, right? And for a diversity quota. And I think it's really interesting. I honestly want people to share more of their diversity data, just so that we can, see the, I guess I'm curious about the progression or downfall from the post-COVID era. But, I think true representation is really important. And so having an equal representation modeled throughout all areas of the organization is really important. So that's myth number one. And then myth number two is specifically centered around Black women having to be grateful for opportunities to educate others. And so, I think when you're in your earlier career, again, being you kind of learn the muscle of speaking up for yourself. And I think learning and growing and advocating for yourself. And I think it's important to work with leaders who are bought into the idea of diversity and inclusion. And so they view the people function not as a HR compliance checklist, but as actually a strategic partner, right? They are in tune with the pulse of the organization, and they care about the culture, right? And I think they're by having somebody that's already bought in, it reframes the tokenization that might happen in certain places. So it's important, again, for all of us to educate ourselves and not be solely responsible towards one specific race or group of people.
Yeah, you brought up tokenism, which I just think that could be a whole episode, honestly. But what does support look like beyond token gestures? We have seen the prolific DEI statements and then seen no action afterwards. I've seen many DEI manifestos, and every time I'm like, show me the data and tell me what you're doing to actually make this happen. So talk to me a little bit about what does support actually look like outside of those token gestures, the posting a black square. I never posted a black square. Ridiculous.
I think it falls in a couple of different ways. I think first and foremost, acknowledgement is really key, specifically from the Oregon leaders, and understanding that emotional burden happens, and it's important to be at the forefront of your self-education to be able to alleviate that. I think it's a partnership at the end of the day, but it shouldn't fall solely on, again, a group of people to be the only voice. I think investing in external resources, I think sometimes it could be due to budgeting or being scrappy. And I think by opening it up to the entire organization, whether it's frugal like that, I think it's important to have, whether it be frameworks or articles. There's a lot of things that are free that, could help kind of give some high level framework or guidance on, bias training or unconscious, language, being proactive about that. Education is, I think, really, really important. I think the other piece is going to come down to two centerfolds. I think mentorship and sponsorship. I think a lot of people of color, and I think when you're looking at the disparity between how does, being the only one or the burden of emotional burdens outweigh with like your counterparts, there is lack of mentorship or sponsorship. I it's like a fight, to like advocate for yourself and have a seat at the table. And so I think it's important for leaders to understand that allyship, mentorship, and sponsorship is really, really important, and defining what that looks like for your own org. And, really pulling that in the engagement surveys too. I mean, obviously, if we're tagging and engaging on sentiments about inclusion, DEI, belonging, that's one of them. I think it's as probing the question to the broader team, like, do you all feel that we have mentorship or sponsorship opportunities available to you all, right? And if the answer is no, there's an opportunity to model that. It ultimately leads to, again, the goal is to keep people motivated, engaged, productive, and it lowers turnover by being able to create an equal level field, right, of, setting people up for success, and predominantly, areas or roles where they are lacking mentorship or sponsorship. And it's honestly a game changer. I started off as like Series A, B, like startups earlier in my career, and I was like reporting to the CEO, and then I ended up like pivoting, and then I joined an organization where I was like had a people leader to like learn from, and it was like such a night and day difference to be able to like actually talk to and learn. And like I've been doing so much like self-learning myself, but to be able to like have a actual leader that like values you, sees you, it like gives you stretch opportunities, like speaks, and the behaviors match up with how they're speaking. So I think it's like it made me want to work harder, and it just also just modeled like the behavior of just like, at the end of the day, I think if we say that we care, like we have to back it up with the how. And this is one of the ways, if we want to keep diverse and retain diverse talent, this is one of the ways that support looks like. And then the last thing I think, which I think is the most important piece, and I think is also something that to noodle on, I think not historically, I think just given startups ecosystem in general, like you're moving really, really, really fast. Like there's so much going on. There's, the North Star, there's OKRs, there's things that are happening, especially when you're in the people field. There are things that are happening ad hoc that are coming up too, that you have to like prioritize, deprioritize, and, get work done. I think similarly to, a retrospective on a quarterly basis on goals, like I think there should be intentionality on looking at diversity and creating a safe space. And so I think it's pulling not just from the engagement surveys, but specific focus groups throughout the team. I think because at the end of the day, statistically, diversity of thought leads companies to innovation and success, right? More money at the end of the day. And so you want to be able to create the conditions and the environment where people feel safe. And so if we're saying that the best idea can come from anywhere, are we creating the conditions where that person actually feels safe enough to voice it? And if the answer is like, you don't know, or it's probably a no, right? And so it's like, that could be, something that you all work on. Again, I think it's culture and leadership is an everybody like problem. It's not a problem. I would say it's actually like a motivation. I think we are all should hold each other accountable for a culture because we're all contributing to it. And so it needs to be understood and talked about in a salient way that I think is important, because at the end of the day yields, success, both in retention efforts, but also moving the company needle forward for growth and success in the long run.
Those are amazing examples. Those are so many good examples as you're thinking about like, how do you actually build a place where everyone feels like they're supported regardless of what group they belong to, or if they are the only or not only, like what does that actually look like? And I think that was just like a masterclass, honestly, what to do. I think about my greatest mentor that had the biggest impact on my professional life. I worked with her for 2 years, and she just really taught me how to communicate at the executive level. A lot of the things I do today are the things that she taught me. And I remember like she was a Black woman, and I just remember thinking like, if she can navigate this corporate jungle, like I need to learn from her, because she has had to deal with all of these things in her career to date. And like, I may experience some of the same things, and I don't think to the extent. I would never equate the struggles that I've experienced in the workplace with the struggle Black women experience, because I do think Black women experience way harder struggles in the workplace, as all the data has shown us, and just like the facts that I know about how people treat Black women. But having her be my mentor, like, also exposed me to so many challenges that like I didn't even know she was also facing. And I like think about her quite constantly as one of the biggest sources of impact on my career. And I feel like really honored that I got a chance to learn from her. And because I had that mentorship, I was able to grow in my career. I was able to like really work on my own executive presence. And I think without that mentorship, I wouldn't have gotten there.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's the same. I think shout out to Lori. She was like had such a positive impact on me, and just like I think the servitude leadership is really important. I think at the end of the day, like it's important to learn from one another, and yeah, struggles might be a little bit different, but there's perspective and learning that can be applied, and also support that from different mechanisms of different groups. I think what works for one group might not necessarily work for another group, and so I think it's also like recognizing like how does allyship and support look like also on that ERG level, and what learnings can we apply, or deeper level of education to be able to essentially set each other up for success and partner and support one another to the best of our abilities.
Also, just like supporting your friends as they're going through it. It's just like,
Absolutely.
I don't know where I would be without my like community of friends who have all experienced, like, I'll be like, is this really happening to me? And I'll explain it, and they'll be like, sure is, it is. Let us tell you more. And I feel like really grateful for the friends I have who have explained a lot of this stuff for me too, that they've gone through. It's made me more empathetic. It's made me more conscious. It's made me more aware. Like all those
Yeah,
subtle things are now very overt to me, because I've had friends who have gone through and had these experiences and are willing to share them with me, and have had, unfortunately, a lot of harm done to them in the workplace. And when they share
absolutely.
these stories, I think to myself, like, I don't ever want to be the person who causes harm to anybody else, or I don't ever want to be at an organization that has like caused harm upon people. And so like I feel like all of HR should carry a significant burden and understanding that like the playing field is not equal for everyone.
Not at
And
all.
we have to build systems that everybody can thrive in, not just certain people. And that means like taking a hard look at everything you do and asking yourself why.
Yeah,
And I feel
absolutely.
like building the programs that you just talked about, those were like amazing steps for people to consider as they're thinking about, how do I build inclusive work cultures?
Yeah.
Um, Sorry, go ahead.
Sorry. I was gonna say one last thing. It's like, don't what is that matter like saying? You can't eat an elephant whole. And so I think if you are afraid of actually like taking like tangible steps because you think it's too big, it's start small. Iteration, right? Make it less burdensome. Take the fear out of not knowing, and come to the table with like I'm challenging myself for the better of the organization, especially if you're a leader of that org.
I just keep talking about this, but like unlearning is one of the most powerful things I've ever done in my life. You have to ask yourself every single time, why did I have this thought? And like, where did I learn this from? And you have to like, I just challenge all of you to like think about the things you think and challenge yourself to like unlearn the things that we have learned. Like, there isn't just one way to be successful. There isn't just one ideal profile. There is lots of ways to do things. Tamika Allen was just on the previous episode talking about neurodiversity in the workplace. And that to me, I'm just like, everyone is experiencing work differently and doing work differently. We really have to unlearn all these behaviors that we're all motivated by the same things, or we all operate the same way, or we can all thrive in ambiguity. It's like, no, that's not true.
No,
And that applies so much, so many things.
absolutely. I think another thing is like if you are in an HR role, and I think from my goal is to like to always pay it forward. I mean, I love to like, help mentor, speak on anything or learn, and like hit me up on LinkedIn. I'm happy to be an ally, an advocate, and a support system if you are needing someone. I think we all can learn from one another, and also join Safe Space. I think, again, shout out plug to Hiba for creating a space where it's a very hard and isolating role. Taking care of the most important asset of an organization is not easy, and it's often a very thankless role. And I think like it's important to acknowledge and recognize that, also from a leadership perspective, to give kudos where kudos is due, and know that there's spaces of belonging and support and communities that are out there, and just to shout. The people are really, really kind. If you ask, you never know who you might end up connecting with and who might help you down the line.
And I did not ask her to give that plug, so thank you. I mean, that's why Safe Space was like born for I literally sat up at 2 a.m. and I was like, we have to call it Safe Space. There has to be a safe space for like HR people to just be HR people, to navigate these things, especially when you're the only, or you're a team of one, or you're the first person in the job. Like, you should not have to do it alone. You really shouldn't. There's a community of people that want to be your biggest cheerleader, your biggest advocate, your biggest support, and that is Safe Space. And like, now I feel like I'm definitely going to cry on this episode.
It's true. I mean,
and then she burst into tears.
I mean, tears are healing. I think we need to reframe that tears are like a bad thing. It just shows the content of your heart and the character of your heart. So no worries.
That's the sweetest thing anyone has ever said to me. I'm a Pisces. I'm a feeler. I'm a dreamer. I have emotions. Thank you for making me feel seen today, Amina.
I always say that.
You're the best. I like to end every episode with like a future piece or an advice piece. And so I have to ask you, if organizations were serious about change, what would look different tomorrow?
That's a really good question.
It's a huge one. I also you don't have a crystal ball, but like, what would you need to see happen?
I think that I would probably segment it into two, like immediate versus like long-term changes. And I think first is just acknowledging, unburden the burden that women of color and specifically marginalized groups face in terms of being the only. So I think an immediate would be like to recognize that if there is one person on the team that happens to be that, and not allow them to be the voice for everyone. So recognize that unfair burden. And then I think the second piece, which I think is the most important, I think I'm just going to do the two other pieces for the immediate actions, is like, bias really shows up in so many different ways, and it's so unconscious, and it's different levels of bias. And I think it's really important to understand what that means from an organizational perspective, and really like kind of define that out in your operating norms. Like, we all have biases, right? I think it's an opportunity to be able to not alienate or isolate somebody who has a different shared experience, or comes from a different background than you. So I think that's number one. And there's so much self-learning that you can do, but I think like from a leadership perspective, I think it's important to have some of the like training stuff, and then add that into your wiki. And so like when it could be top of mind for performance reviews, or like you can add it into your Slack, like code of conduct or ethics, or how you communicate with one another, right? It could be embedded into harassment training. I think language, again, is really, really important. And I think understanding how bias plays a role in the negative impacts and consequences it has, I think is really important. So first, education. And then the last piece is definitely just being able to also highlight just like microaggressions. So the do's and don'ts, high level, right? I think, again, having that memorialized somewhere so that, folks can refer back to, like, it's really important in terms of, being able to keep one another accountable, right? And so, like I said, sometimes somebody in a meeting might not necessarily feel strong enough or to be able to voice something, but if a counterpart sees that and that's already outlined in kind of like the wiki, that person could happen to like, advocate for that person or speak up, right? So again, it's like a safe space of accountability, and that's a shared responsibility. And so I think those are kind of like again, it's an iterative process of small tangible things. And then I think the bigger piece would be like really dissecting representation and looking at like diversity data. So I think equity is really important. So promotion, the hiring ratios by gender, like how many people are in manager roles, like mentorship opportunities, development, like looking at that like on a granular, I think, DEI perspective to make sure that it's actually equitable and fair and that you can track against it, I think is really important. And so there's a lot of levels where some organizations have a really great job of doing that. And it's also like modeled and shared case, like, externally, right? I think it's important to showcase those numbers internally too. Again, it showcases how behind, not being performative about the DEI perspective. Yeah. And I think the other piece is just like maybe reframing what DEI means. I think taking into consideration the current climate, there are a lot of people who are scared, right? And so I think there's a lack of there's a fear of speaking up because there might be certain institutions that now have turned their stance on DEI, right? And so it's like, are you all as managers like checking in, right? Are people actually like afraid of not being able to get fired, for example, because they are a part of this group, right? And so I think it's important to check how the political climate, and again, it's not political, I would say it's human rights issues, and it showcases and it shows up at work, right? And so it's like, I think it's important to just frame like understanding of what that means and then defining it for your organization, and then again, backing it up with the what, why, and how.
Amazing. Systemic changes are they scare me sometimes because I'm like, we can do it. It just, a lot of people are like, it'll take so long. So like, maybe we should just like not. And I'm like, no, we can do all these things so easily today. Like you can start the groundwork to really make a lot of this a reality. And it shouldn't be like, just because you said the word systemic does not mean it's like this massive undertaking that's going to take years to fix everything. Like Rome, that stupid phrase, Rome wasn't built in a day. We can't change the system.
Absolutely.
We just can't, but we have to start somewhere. And I think like
Mm-hmm.
what you just talked about are two excellent places to pressure test that we ourselves in HR can also control.
Absolutely. I would also I think, pull it to the team. I mean, add it to the engagement survey during that. Like, what is one thing what should we commit to a meaningful change that represents this? And who knows, maybe like internally y'all would have different ideas that actually might be more tangible and immediate. So I think pulling the team, like that's where diversity of thought really comes in, as it's like the more brains and support on the matter, the better it is. And I think, again, the accountability. So I think it's important to add that. You don't have to be the solutioner all the time just because you're in HR.
Oh,
Solutions.
yeah. That's a great point. We don't have to be the solutioners. We can crowdsource our solutions with our team.
Yeah,
right?
Democracy.
I love it. Oh my God, Amina, this has been such an impactful conversation, one that I hope we can continue and have more often and more openly and honestly. Like this is the conversation that like I have with my best girlfriends all the time about our roles in HR and how we show up as like daughter of immigrants, like how we navigate the world. And I think this conversation is so powerful. So I hope we just never stop having it and help people understand like being the only can be sad, and it cannot be sad, can be lonely. It can also be sad in my personal experience, actually. But it can be really lonely, but you're never alone. Like we're all navigating this world together, and there's a community of people that will support you. Me, Amina, Safe Space, anyone. Like you can find places and people to help you as you're navigating this, because it is hard, and the burden does get placed on the only very often. And so just thinking about that in your own workplace, making sure you're not doing that and causing that harm to other people as well is super important.
I agree. And I think differences should be celebrated at the end of the day. So at the end of the day, people will forget what you said and did, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. And that's a Maya Angelou quote that I live by. So the keys to conditions of empowerment make the world go round, in my opinion.
I love that. For people who love this episode and want to get in touch with you, I always share LinkedIn, but is there any other way you'd like people to get in touch with you? Or are you a LinkedIn person too?
I'm a LinkedIn person too. we're training on that.
We're just like LinkedIn humans right now, Wish it could be anything else, but here we are. Or you can find Amina in
So-
Safe Space. Or you can come hang out with me, Amina, in Safe Space and tell us what this episode meant to you.
Absolutely.
Look at us.
I would love
Thank
that.
you so much for spending time with me today, for being vulnerable, talking about this topic, sharing your knowledge and your expertise, your lived experience. Like, I feel so honored that we were able to like have this conversation and you felt comfortable and seen by me. So thank you, Amina.
No, thank you so much, Hiba. And thank you so much for creating a space where people actually, talk about the hard things and lean into being uncomfortable, because that's where growth comes from, and creating just a community where we all can just help support and one another to like grow and belong. So I really truly believe Safe Space has been such an opportunity for me to it's been so impactful positively for me.
Guys, I'm not paying her to say this, y'all. I did not tell her to say this. But on that note, that was just a beautiful way to end this episode. I'm so, so grateful for you, and thank you.
I'm grateful for you too. Thank you, Hiba.
Thanks for tuning in. Keep up with all the latest HR resources by subscribing on Apple, Spotify, Google, or wherever you listen. And if you love I Hate It Here, tell an HR friend. I'll see you next time.